So this is Act 2, Scene 2. And I'm just going to point out a few things from this scene. You're going to have to read some of it on your own. But this part right here, Lady Macbeth is alone on stage, and Macbeth is off stage. And a few things that she talks about is she talks about the same liquor. So she's been drinking and she got the guards drunk. She says Macbeth must be killing the king right now. This is where she talks about how she did what she was supposed to do. And then she said, I put so many drugs in their drinks that you can't tell if they're alive or dead. So what we're getting here is that Lady Macbeth kind of set everything up, and now Macbeth is actually in there killing King Duncan. All right. So let's go down a little bit further. And on this part, right here, and Macbeth alluded to this earlier in the play whenever he talked about how he was afraid of the consequences. She talks about what she's afraid of, and she says, I'm afraid the servants woke up and the murder didn't happen. For us to attempt the murder and not succeed would ruin us. So she's not worried really about the murder, but getting caught. She's worried about the consequences if they fail. Not necessarily about the fact that they're murdering the king. All right, so she really has no guilt about murdering the king. Okay, so this part right here, Macbeth enters carrying bloody daggers. So what this tells us is that he's guilty of the crime. He actually went through with it. So he's guilty of the crime, and he says, I've done the deed. Let's scroll down a little bit further. They just talk a little bit about, did you hear the owl cry, the crickets? Now let's look at this part right here. So we talked about the blood motif. Now let's look at the motif of sleep in peace. All right, so Macbeth says that that there was a point, and he's talking about it right here. And he says that there's a point when one of them laughed in his sleep and the other cried murder, and they woke each other up. But then they said their prayers and went back to sleep without acknowledging Macbeth. But this right here is really going to start to get to Macbeth. Look at what Macbeth says down a little bit further. He talks about how he wanted to say amen, but he couldn't. But then, this is the important part right here. Down a little bit further, and we're going to get to that sleep motif. So on the sleep motif, Macbeth says, I thought I heard a voice cry, sleep no more, Macbeth is murdering sleep. So if sleep is peace, the voice says no more peace. But then you look a little bit further and it's no more peace, Macbeth is murdering sleep. So why will he have no more peace? Because of the murder. So because of the murder, Macbeth will no longer have sleep. And then he goes on and just talks about innocent sleep, sleep that soothes away our worries, puts each day at rest, relieves the weary labored, and heals the hurt mind. And just goes on to talk about how peaceful sleep is. And so we're going to get that message about sleep from that. And I want to point out down here, Shakespeare's version, he says, Glamis has murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more, Macbeth shall sleep no more. So I want to point out Shakespeare's version because I feel like the modern version misses something here. And that's that it says Glamis has murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more, Macbeth shall sleep no more. And so there's your difference. Because what he was as the Thane of Glamis is a different person than he was of Cawdor. Because when he was the Thane of Glamis, he was loyal and honorable, right? So we're going to put loyal, you can put trustworthy. And so with that, but then with the Thane of Cawdor, he's ambitious. And because he's so ambitious and he has that ambition to be king, he is now doing whatever it takes to become king. So the idea is that whenever he was the loyal one, he had peace. But now that his ambition has led him to kill King Duncan as Lord of Cawdor, that's where his peace ends. And we get that from he murdered sleep, okay? So you're starting to see how the motif of sleep and that symbolism really helps us to see Macbeth's peace that he has, or lack of peace that he has. So we talked about the sleep with Macbeth saying that he heard a voice cry, Glamis has murdered sleep, therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. Now we're going to go back to that blood motif. And let's look at, we're going to be looking at what Lady Macbeth says. So she says, go get some water and wash this bloody evidence from your hands. And she's really just kind of saying, don't feel it. So if we're looking at blood and guilt, she's saying, don't feel guilty. And why does she not want him to feel guilty? Because that's going to make him seem suspicious. And I want to point out this next part because this kind of, he may have just about ruined the plan. She says, why did you carry these daggers out of the room? So we don't actually see, because we're having to look at the dialogue. So he is about to ruin the plan because he brought the daggers out of the room. And remember, the daggers had to be laying with the guards in order for the guards to look guilty. So then we go back to the sleep motif. And she says, go take them back and smear the sleeping guards with the blood. Why would she want him to smear the sleeping guards with the blood? To make them seem guilty. So she's wanting that blood to be on the guards so that they're the ones who seem guilty. But if the daggers are not with them, then it ruins their plan. So after that, Macbeth says, I can't go back. So she said to him, go take the daggers back. And he says, I can't go back. I can't stand to look at it again. So we're seeing that he has that feeling of guilt in what he's just done. She's like, oh, coward, give me the daggers. And she goes back and she says this. She says, if Duncan bleeds, I'll paint the servants' faces with his blood. We must make it seem like they're guilty. So there's that blood and sleep, or blood and guilt, my bad. That blood and guilt motif there. All right, so there at this point, there is a knocking coming from off stage. All right, and that knocking, we're going to talk a little bit about what that knocking can really start to, even though it doesn't seem like a big deal, it is. And Macbeth mentions, where's that knocking coming from? And he says, everything is frightening me. Everything is making me feel afraid. All right, now, this is probably one of the best pieces in the play in terms of the motif of blood and guilt. He says, will all the water in the ocean wash this blood from my hands? No, instead my hands will stain the sea scarlet, turning the green waters red. And look at the way that Shakespeare wrote it. He says, will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hands? And he says, no. There's nothing that can get rid of the blood. So what do we get from this motif? He's saying nothing will get rid of his guilt. So no matter what, he will never be able to get rid of his guilt. Just like there's no amount of water in the ocean that can wash the blood from his hands, there's nothing on earth that will get rid of his guilt. Then he says down here, no, instead my hands will stain the sea scarlet, turning the green waters red. So not only will the water not be able to wash the blood from his hands, but he believes that the blood will spread and turn the green sea red. So just with that, we're seeing that guilt is going to spread. It's not going to stay there. It's going to spread even further than just on his hands. Okay? So let's go down a little bit further. Again, they're still knocking. And look what Lady Macbeth says right here. She says, my hands are as red as yours. So now she has blood on her hands she says, I would be ashamed if my heart were as pale and weak. So when she says that, she's saying, my hands are red, and I would be ashamed if I were as pale as weak as the blood on my hands. And then a little bit further, a little water will wash away the evidence of our guilt. It's so simple. So she is having this attitude that it's no big deal. She's just like, hey, go get some water. A little water washes this away. It's so simple. Whereas Macbeth is saying no amount of water could wash the blood from his hands. She's saying just a little bit of water. So that shows us the difference in their feelings of guilt. Macbeth has great guilt for what he's just done. He feels like nothing will ever get rid of the guilt and that it's going to spread. There's no way that it's going to stay like that. Whereas Lady Macbeth is saying just a little bit of water washes away the evidence of our guilt. It's so simple. Then a little bit further down, Macbeth says, wait, Duncan, with your knocking. I wish you could. So we see right here that he already regrets what he's done. And he feels that guilt.